it is, ladies and gentlemen, Father Hines and his great band playing for you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's Great South Side.
Morning, everybody.
For 30 minutes of Super Jive in the Father Hines.
Let's enjoy this Super Jive in the Father Hines style.
What could this be? Ah, it's a Limehouse Blues.
Morning, Becky, Beth, Pamela, Marie, Linda, Betsy, Sarah, and Martin. Hey, Chris. Hey, Chuck. Morning, Jordana. Hey, Lori. Morning, Karen and Larry. Hey, Mona. Mona tried to tell me. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Sherry. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Karen. Hey, Lorena and Heidi. Morning all around. Hey, Libby. Hey, Tricia, Bridget, and Mary Jo. Hey, Alexandra and Christy. Yep. Hey, Cheryl. Hey, Evelyn. Hi, Patricia. Morning, Libby. Hey, Kathy. Oh, I missed a birthday here someplace. Hang on. Hey, happy birthday, Sherry. Hey, Heidi and Bucky Kitty. Yeah. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Colleen. Hey, Kelly. Hey, Katie. Heal quick. Hey, Sue and Dina. Hey, Lenora and Alexandra. Hey, Sue. Hey, Kelly. Sometimes he's come out of order. I hope I'm getting everything. Hey, Jay, Dave, and Barb. Hey, Betsy. Today is the expanded edition of Graceland and Rosehill, the places that I don't normally get to on the walking tours for geographical reasons. Howdy, Suzanne. Hey, Donna. Hey, Kelly. Morning, Octavio. Hey, Laura. Hey, Nancy. Natalie.
Yeah, Earl Father Hines carries on now and presents Leroy Harris to sing Teacher's Pet.
Alright, gonna turn off the mail so anybody tries to email with tech support questions is a little too late. How did the morning happen? Don't worry, Susan, it'll dawn on you. Hey, Mike. And Donna. Hey, Heather. Hey, Laura. I put out a message about this to a couple of the Bob Dylan fan groups. We're all waiting for a Dylan live stream this afternoon. I thought this would be a fun way for him to kill time. I don't know if anyone's going to come. Hey, Casey. Somebody did manage to make the joke. I bet people are dying to get into that. Like, I've never heard that one before. Hey, Audrey. Hey, Napur. Morning, Ava and Shayla. Hey, Lynn. Hey, Roy. Hi, Georgia. Morning, Laura. Glad you're back. Hey, Jeanne. Hey, Lisa. And good morning all around. Hey, Eric. Man, I did not take my medicine until too late today. The sinus headache is coming on anyway. Bob, I doubt we'll have any nipples showing today. But there is supposed to be a statue going in at Graceland. They've had like the design for it, it's had approval, but it's been slow to actually get there. that will, in fact, be topless. Hey, Susan. Hey, Nancy. I've seen the design for it. It is a really great statue. I hope they actually do install it. Hey, Kristen. Hey, congrats, Donna. Hey, Toby, Christine, and Patty. Hey, Marley. Hey, Melissa.
Give our faithful seaters
Morning, Gladys.
carry on and jive. Hi-ho, Silver!
Yeah, Joanne, if I don't take my medicine, I get sinus headaches every single day. But I think I might have cut it off at the pass, so it shouldn't get too much worse than it is now. If it does, I got some things that'll take care of it. So. Oh, cool, Jay. Hey, Sue. Hey, Kathy. Patty, nobody forced me to. I love giving people rides to stuff. That's why I enjoyed working for Lyfts. But yeah, I saw people walking and said, okay, I got 4 spaces. Hey, Jeff. Alright, I'm waiting on finalizing the contract with the ship before I start putting up the stuff for the October 1st boat tour. Thanks, Beverly. Yeah, in a regular cemetery walking tour, we get about between 3,000 and 4,000 steps in. Taylor Street, probably about the same. Prairie Avenue will probably be fewer. So it's really not that long of a walk in there. That's why that one's kind of an experiment right now.
Stop and have a little Father Hines melody of the Colorado sunset. Jive.
Hey, Hal. Good morning, everybody. Kathy, I felt like the in-person tour was great yesterday. We didn't get hassled by the cemetery or anything. I managed not to dance on Wilbur F's story, though as we walk away, it is for me a jump to the left and for everyone else a step to the right. No, they've asked me not to dance on graves there anymore, no matter how much they deserve it. The lawnmower passes over the just and the unjust. Suzanne, I don't know about Longgrove. Hey, Bob. Yeah, next Saturday after this is going to be Graceland again. But they haven't been hassling me lately. A couple of months ago, they sent me some emails that they've been getting all these complaints about me dancing on graves. Apparently somebody posted it on one of those white pride Facebook groups. Gene, weather's not too bad. When I went for a walk earlier today, it was in the 70 range.
With a bow to Leroy Harris for the words, we turn on now to the next tune. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Sorry to hear that, Joanne. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Veronica. Hey, Susie. And Donna, this is the grave of Vincent Starr. We'll cover it fairly early on in the tour. So consider this a preview. Hey, Mom. I don't know who it was exactly. I remember there was one guy on back on the old Atlas Obscura page who had an absolute fit about me talking smack about Wilbur F's story and saying that I was inciting violence and stuff. And then he started emailing the cemetery. If they'd clicked on his blog, they would have known not to listen to this guy. His blog is really horrifying. Hey, Susan. Hey, Sue. But Graceland gets it too. They occasionally would get a sudden batch of emails about me doing stuff like that. Graceland will just brush it off. They know where it's coming from. Carol, the new mausoleum hasn't even been started yet. It's going to be a long time. They got to design it. They got to find the stone for it. That's going to take a while. It'll be the first new mausoleum at Graceland in years. Hey, Amy. Hey, Terry. Hey, Anita. Right, I'm a lot better at inciting people to have some pie. Alright, we'll give everybody a couple more minutes to log on. About 20% of the viewers tend to come on right after 10 o'clock. Patty, it's going to be a private one for Richard Dreyhouse. Probably his family as well. Morning, Vivian. Hey, Larry. A Lego mausoleum I could kind of see, covered in enough lucite. With a craggle. Hey, Kristen. Hey, Deanne. Morning, Terry. Morning, everybody. Hey, Laura. Morning, Kristen. See, I told you people start popping in a couple minutes after, so we'll let Earl Father Hines fill out another song here. I'll fill out the end of this one. A pie influencer, that's all I ever wanted to be.
Well, we're about halfway through this jive concert by Earl Father Hines and his orchestra, so now it can be told it's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace.
Alright, this has been Earl Father Hines coming to you from the new Grand Terrace, or it was new in the 30s, on Chicago's Great South Side. Still standing, though today is a Busey shop, but it still has some of the old murals from when it was a jazz club. But anyway, welcome along, everybody. Welcome along to another Mysterious Chicago Sunday morning virtual tour. We have been doing virtual tours every Thursday night and Sunday morning ever since the pandemic hit. Now we're doing in-person tours on Saturday as well. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for over 15 years. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, and Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, which I co-wrote with a guy named Michael Glover Smith that I knew from the Bob Dylan fan community. This afternoon is a big Bob Dylan live stream, his first live performance that we've seen since the pandemic. There's a new backing band, anything can happen. I'm super excited. There will probably be several Dylan references just sprinkled into today's tour, just because that's where my head is today. I haven't seen a Dylan show where I didn't know pretty well what the set list was going to be ahead of time in almost 10 years now. Super exciting for me. But today's tour is Graceland and Rosehill Cemetery off the route. We started doing walking tours again, in-person walking tours. We did one at Rosehill yesterday. 2 weeks from yesterday is going to be another Graceland tour. But on any of them, these are pretty large cemeteries. There are certain graves that have incredible stories, that have incredible monuments, but we don't really get to them on the walking tours just because they're a little too far off of the beaten path. At Graceland, there's a couple of them even that no matter what the route is, we never seem to end up at these ones. So today on the virtual tour, one of the benefits of virtual tours is we're not bound by geography. So instead, we're going to go to all of these places. There are quite a few of them anyway. We will start by heading into Graceland Cemetery. Graceland Cemetery, just a few blocks north of Wrigley Field. Burials here started about 1860, founded by a guy by the name of Thomas Barber Bryan. Bought land initially from a guy named Justin Butterfield, who was once asked if he opposed the Mexican-American War, and said, Well, of course not. I ruined my political chances by opposing the War of 1812, so now I'm in favor of all forms of pestilence, suffering, and idiocy. He is now buried in what used to be his land, and this is the main entrance to it. This part we can, of course, usually hit, but way up in the land above Butterfield's land, in the land that used to be Conrad Sulzer's farm. Well, first, we will show off here. This is kind of hidden. I spoke a little bit yesterday about the hidden grave at Graceland that's one Civil War soldier. There's a guy named William Webb who died of typhoid fever very early in the war. But up over in Conrad Sulzer's area, up in Section R, this is a section that almost never comes up on the tours. It's way up in the corner, and really most of the interesting graves in Section R, for one reason or another, are unmarked. But right here on the right is one of the ones that is marked. This is the grave of an officer named George Dewey. Now, George Dewey with the Chicago police was the liaison to the newsboys community. Kids who sold newspapers for a living. Many of these kids were homeless or pretty much homeless. Some of them came from big rich families, but others just kind of lived on the streets, and there was a whole community that was largely unsupervised, self-sufficient and unsupervised. They would sleep on benches in the newspaper office and newspaper alley. George Dewey, their sponsor, would come in and make sure they weren't breaking too many laws. They were always gambling, but he had to kind of just ignore that. You can't really change up the culture too much. But he was able to arrange for several of them to get instructions on how to read. He was known to buy shoes for every kid in Newsboys Alley occasionally. This was like hundreds of kids, many of whom unclothed, completely unsupervised. All of them had nicknames, and most of them were wildly offensive. I mean, these were unsupervised kids. They weren't necessarily polite. There's a particular story. There was a kid who's buried in another unmarked grave a little further north in the cemetery, who was known as Young Waffles. His brother's name was Waffles, so known for all the smallpox scars on his face. And when he died, his brother took over his route and just became Young Waffles by default. Right next to George Dewey, though, is an unmarked space for a woman by the name of Sarah Good. There's a couple of photographs of Sarah that circulate, but neither of them are actually her. If you look her up, you'll see the same two pictures, but one's actually a white woman. The other is, I don't know where they got it. But Sarah Elizabeth Good was often listed as the first black woman to get a United States patent. Now, people who wrote articles about that were a little bit hasty. Since then, a couple of others have been found earlier than that. But she was probably the first black woman to get a patent in Chicago anyway. She was the inventor of a thing called a cabinet bed. Now, at the time, there were a lot of folding beds on the market. This was one of them. She seems to have invented two, which she and her husband Archie sold in their furniture store on State Street. Now, a lot of what we know about her, honestly, comes from lawsuit records. She and her husband borrowed a lot of money and got a lot of credit to buy furniture to sell in their store from places like Marshall Field's Wholesale. And what's most remarkable about this is Sarah usually got the credit and the loans by herself without her husband co-signing. In the 1880s, for a woman to be able to do that was really kind of remarkable, and some even would claim that it was illegal at the time. But for a black woman especially, that much more so. There's some interesting speculation. According to all available records, she was born in Ohio. Some people have said that maybe her parents were lying about that and they were actually refugee slaves. It's possible, but I feel like people just say it more because it makes the story more dramatic. In any case, it was a remarkable feat that she was able to run this store. Unfortunately, that store was in the basement of a medical school on State Street. Now and then, things would leak and flood. The furniture all got completely wrecked. They didn't have enough insurance on it to cover it, so they only seem to have lasted in business for a couple of years, after which Sarah kind of vanishes from the record. Her husband, Archie, became a very well-known contractor in the city, but she kind of disappeared from the record, is now buried in an unmarked grave that I know the cemetery would love to get marked. We might have to do a GoFundMe on this or something. But there is now a school named after her, the Sarah E. Good STEM Academy, down on the south side of Chicago. Now, elsewhere, up along the north wall, one of my favorite guys to talk about. Sometimes I talk about this guy on the tours anyway in one of his earlier burial sites, just because he's so much fun to talk about. This unmarked grave here. And I'll move this up a little bit. The unmarked grave in the middle section is a guy by the name of Seth Payne. Now, this is one of Seth Payne's newspapers with a drawing of himself on, and this is at a time when this came out in the 1850s, beards had not started their big comeback yet. There's a famous letter somebody wrote at the time. A woman went for a walk and wrote that I saw 3 people with beards and an elephant. Really, the way that she phrases it, the elephant seems like much less of a deal than seeing men with beards walking around. But Seth Payne started a bank in Chicago that was operated on spiritualist principles. Among the employees he had were women who served as spirit mediums so that he could have conferences with the ghost of Alexander Hamilton or George Washington to get advices on whether to give somebody a loan or not. Now, there was a newspaper at the time that referred to him as a queer chicken. His obituary said that all of the isms stuck to him like burrs on sheep's wool. Now, but among those isms were a lot of things that ranged from kind of harmless like spiritualism to really kind of radical. He was into feminism way before most people were. He was into abolitionism at a time before abolitionism had really gotten a foothold even in the city. And during the Civil War, he joined up with Pinkerton and the Secret Service to go out to Antietam. That is Seth Payne over there on the left. His main job was trying to liberate enslaved people who were being held in the D.C. jail at the time. Actual data on his Underground Railroad work is kind of hard to come by, but he was widely regarded as one of the biggest operators in Chicago. He's got some houses out in the suburbs they've found some hidden compartments in that they suspect might have been for hiding people during the Underground Railroad escapes. I kind of doubt it. They're more likely just root cellars or something. Mostly he would have had people just hanging out in his living room. After the Civil War, he started a woman's home over by where Hull House eventually would be. And this is where he died in 1871. It was kind of a challenge to find his grave. The newspapers made a big deal out of it when he died. He was a very well-known figure in Chicago. A lot of other really prominent people at Graceland were his pallbearers. But, according to cemetery records, we couldn't find a record of his burial. Finally, one day I just got the interment book and combed through from a few days around his funeral and finally found that they just had his name spelled a little bit differently. But he also was initially buried in a whole different plot over in the middle of the cemetery that nobody owned. I don't know how that worked. Then somebody bought that plot, they moved him to somewhere else in the same section, then someone bought that one, eventually they moved him up to over here, which I still think is not officially owned by anyone. I've been trying to find better military records for him. If we get military records that establish that his service was official, we should be able to get the government to supply a headstone for him. Still working on that one. I think he certainly deserves one. And we'll move along here. He must have been an odd sight in the 1850s. He was dressing in robes for reasons that don't really survive. He was growing a long beard before most people did. He must have been a sight, this abolitionist wizard walking around the streets of Chicago talking to the dead. Let's move out to a nice autumn shot. A little further south, but along Section G, another area we don't really get to too often. And first of all, we've got this haunting one of the Wolf family. I believe that is Frances depicted on there. Frances was a daughter of theirs who died at age 4, though it's worn away significantly now. And over here, we've got one of them that I just kind of stumbled onto entirely by chance with a book resting on a pillow here. I had to stare at the signature that's on top of it for a really long time trying to figure out what it said. It's a very sloppy signature, but going by the records, it turned out to be a woman by the name of Florence McLandberg, who, when she was just a teenager, was an early science fiction writer back in the 1800s. Now, this is when science fiction didn't have a name yet. They still called it like scientific romances or gothic sciences, things like that. She wrote a collection of stories called The Automaton Ear. And the title story of that is considered a minor classic in sci-fi. It's what they call a time viewer story. It's about a guy who invents a device that allows him to hear things from way back in the past. He was able to tune things enough that he can still hear the echoes of orchestras from 300 years ago. So we could use it and go to a concert in 1966 ourselves. But of course, eventually it drives him nuts. It's a very heavily Edgar Allan Poe influenced story. But if you want to look it up, look up The Automaton Ear. It's on Google Books for free, really easy to find. But she suffered from really ill health as a teenager that kept her from writing again for a long time. About 30 years later, she assumed a different name and started writing really patriotic poetry during World War I. Then, after World War I, she started writing mostly letters to the editor. And most of these were about the war and about political issues, but her big point was nobody really won the war. The important thing is now we've got these weapons where with a push of the button you could shoot the world wide. We've got to get rid of them all. Nobody's going to win until we've completely disarmed everybody. She also wrote about things like civil rights. She was writing about things like organized religion far before Lenny Bruce started preaching about it. There's a really interesting letter to the editor in response to hers. A guy says, "I always enjoy Florence McLandberg's letter, but I imagine she is a young woman, a product of the modern educational system, who just hasn't yet learned the softening influence of religion." And then somebody wrote in to say, Florence McLandberg is like 80, right? She was starting to give interviews again and starting to write again around the time of her death. Somehow she got cured. I don't know what the nature of her disease was, but after decades of suffering from it, one doctor seemed to have been able to cure her of it. She had moved to Michigan by then, but she loved to reminisce about old Chicago affairs like Edwin Booth and Mary McVicker and their scandalous love affair that was all the talk for a while. We saw the Mary's grave yesterday. Now, up in the opposite corner of the cemetery, is what they call the rubble wall, which is occasionally rumored to be built out of old gravestones from the old city cemetery. Now, it's not really, but there are a lot of stones in that wall that are based on old bits of coping or old disused headstones. There's even a couple where you can read a little bit. Things like, there's one where you can read the words, "Asleep in Jesus." But right among the middle of them is a small, unassuming marker for Captain George Wellington Streeter, a guy who at least liked to think of himself as Chicago's last pioneer. 1888, this guy, when Lake Michigan went all the way to Michigan Avenue, this guy crashed his houseboat onto the shore and started charging people money to dump their garbage around his ship. Eventually, he created this 186-acre landfill. Now, the city was already filling it in anyway. He mostly just took credit for it and forged a whole bunch of signatures to claim squatters' rights. But he decided that not only did he own this new land, but it was his own independent country of which he was the emperor. He had a whole army of hobos that he had allowed to emigrate to his new country, who were always ready to fight back. There wasn't just legal battles. It took the cops 30 years to get rid of the guy. There were occasional gunfights. At one point, they ruled that he could no longer live in the district, so what he did was he hitched up a house onto an automobile. Effectively, this might have been the first automobile motorhome. People have been living in caravans and things for years. This was essentially like a train car on a truck bed. They didn't have a lot of parking regulations at the time. Officially, he couldn't live there, but they couldn't stop him from parking there. And it was things like this that even though this guy was a rascal, he was a murderer and a pirate, not a pioneer, but people developed kind of a soft spot for him, even though he held up development of the Magnificent Mile for decades and was really a no-good character. But there was just a certain amount of gumption in him that people just had to admire. And when he died, his funeral was a really big affair. By then, he had finally lost the Battle of Garbage Hill and gotten kicked out, but he still claimed ownership of it. There's a great rumor saying that on his deathbed, he put a curse on the entire neighborhood, saying that if he were not the owner, nothing good would ever be built there. So maybe if you really dislike the Magnificent Mile or Streeterville, but I think there's plenty of good things there, but nobody ever said the guy was good at cursing things. Now let's move on. In the same section, up over here in the northwest side, there's one of them, as far as I know, it's unmarked. At least I've never been able to find a marker for him. But this is a section that the cemetery specifically advertised when it opened that there would be no visible monuments. Nothing would go above the grass line. This was a fairly late addition to the cemetery, and in the late 1800s, that was just a style. It's something that goes in and out at cemeteries all the time, that it should just be more like a memorial park. No visible monuments. Everything should just look like nature. But there's one of the guys buried around here that I'm assuming they never bothered to put up a marker for, named William Drossel, who lived kind of near Damon, Elston, and Fullerton, the kind of intersection that might drive you to madness. But what happened with William Drossel is one day he accidentally shot himself while he was trying to murder his wife. Oops. Now, it's hard to get your head around this. I mean, pickpocketing you have to learn how to do. Murder is not really that complicated. Take heavy object, apply brute force. Apparently what had happened was he had tried to murder his wife unsuccessfully a couple of times. And then this day the idea was going to be murder-suicide. He wrote in the margins of a newspaper, "I wish to be buried at Graceland Cemetery," then shot at his wife and then shot himself. without bothering to check whether he'd actually hit his wife or not. He had not. So I'm really kind of surprised they actually bothered to bury this guy at Graceland, but they did. He's in there someplace. Death is listed, I believe, as accidental. And just a bit beyond them in the Lakeview section, there's one of them that I'd love to include on more tours. It's just a little ways off of the walking route. This is for Governor Altgeld, who in the early 1890s might have been the first Democrat that I voted for. Usually in old school papers, certainly not modern ones, but old school ones, I usually side with the radical Republicans. Altgeld was kind of a different breed of Democrat at the time. He was baffled people of both parties with his assertions that under the current system, the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. But what he's best remembered for is a few years before his term was the Haymarket Affair. There had been a rally for the 8-hour workday. The second the permit for the rally expired, the cops started marching towards it, pointing guns at everybody. Somebody threw a bomb. They never figured out who threw the bomb, but all of the speakers and even some people who hadn't been there were arrested, and several of them were sentenced to be executed. Four of them were executed. One of them blew his own brains out with a dynamite cap right before the execution could take place. But Altgeld ended up issuing a posthumous pardon and included a pardoning all the people who were still in prison for involvement with this. He knew that was going to be political suicide on his part. It got him called every name in the book, but today we keep on naming things after him. The general consensus today has been that he's right. As he said, they've got some of his best quotes engraved right on his stone. If the defendants had a fair trial, there ought to be no interference, for no punishment under our laws could then be too severe. But they did not have a fair trial. The evidence utterly fails to connect the unknown who threw the bomb with the defendants, and I am convinced that it is my duty to act. In fact, a couple of them were demonstrably not even at the rally that day. There's another great one here on the other side. The doctrine that might makes right has covered the earth with misery. While it crushes the weak, it also destroys the strong. Every deception, every cruelty, every wrong reaches back sooner or later and crushes its author. Justice is moral health, bringing happiness. Wrong is moral disease, bringing moral death. The guy could really write. There was a book towards the end of his life called The High Cost of Something for Nothing that you can I think you could pick that one up on Google Books as well. And one of them that's really very close to the route, we've occasionally gone over to this one, is this statue by Nellie Verne Walker. Nellie Verne Walker was a protege of Laredo Taft, who did a couple of famous monuments here in the cemetery, including Eternal Silence, which is on every walking tour, and also did most of the work on the monument of Washington with Chaim Solomon that is on Wacker Drive now. That was designed by Taft, but then he died, so his students such as Nell Verne Walker ended up finishing it for him. But this is one, a lot of her commissions early on were in cemeteries. This is for the Fraley and Watson family, who had, it was one really particularly bad day. The grandparents of the family were living in their house, along with a couple of their children and a couple of their grandchildren. They lost one of the children and one of the grandchildren on the same day, from different diseases. And they must have known it was coming, as records indicate that they had bought the plot here a couple of days before. Their daughter, the one who had lost a child that day, was big into societies and clubs. Through her art club, she probably would have met Nell Verne Walker, who was ended up being one of the most noted woman sculptors in Chicago history, certainly at the time. Now, she occasionally shows up on Pride Month tours as well, Nell Verne Walker. It's one of those cases where we don't really know for sure, but she never married, and she did have a quote saying, "I've never met a man who could interest me as much as my work." It's little things like this that give us certain ideas about people in the 20th century. And here is the one from the beginning. First we'll pass through, I love the shot I got, with the leaves falling from the limbs and the branches casting shadows on their stones. There's a deep dive Dylan reference. It's a long walk to this one, so there's the thing when he was recording the song Moonlight, they were listening to the playback, and he said, "I just want to use the rough mix." And the engineer said, "Well, Bob, you messed it up. You said statos here instead of shadows." And Bob took a long drag on his cigarette and said, "Well, you know, statos." This is the columbarium at Graceland. There's a marker there for Marion Mahoney Griffin, one of the most notable woman architects in Chicago. That's a whole other tour. I should probably do the Women at Graceland tour in person sometime. I could do that. We've done it very successfully. I know the CAC, Mary from the CAC, does a Women of Influence tour. I think that's coming up in the next couple of weeks there, too. We'll move up and we go back behind the columbarium and into this hill. We end up on the edges of this hill. Off in the distance, you can see James H. Collins, the abolitionist lawyer that I talk about in nearly every tour. But there is this absolutely magnificent marker, added years later by the fans of Vincent Starrett, who for years was the Chicago Tribune's book critic, good friend of Carl Sandburg, who met Dylan in 62 or 63, or Dylan met him, really. Vincent Starrett was the Chicago Tribune's book critic for years, but really best remembered and best known for his Sherlock Holmes fandom. What you can see here is these were his book plates that he would stamp in his books. The Last Bookman, and It Is Always 1895. You get a magnifying glass like Sherlock Holmes. Now, the phrase "It Is Always 1895" is something he used twice. Once there was a poem he wrote called 221B, all about Watson and Holmes, saying, "Here though the world survive, the world explode, these two survive, and it is always 1895. He also said it even more luridly in one of his essays about Holmes called this went, "There can be no grave for Sherlock Holmes or Watson. Shall they not always live in Baker Streets? Are they not there this instant as one writes? Outside the hansoms rattle through the rain, and Moriarty plots his latest devilry. Within the sea-coal flames upon the hearth, and Holmes and Watson take their well-earned ease. So still they live for all those that love them well, in a romantic chamber of the heart, in a nostalgic country of the mind, where it is always 1895. We can see here Starrett was about 9 years old in 1895. Probably remember the years that he first discovered Sherlock Holmes. If he was following the papers, he would have been following the H.H. Holmes case. So here's a picture of how he looked in one of his passport photos. Nobody ever looks good in a passport photo, really. There's also this terrific one from him in the 1950s. There was a book that came out called Chicago Murders. It's a collection of murder stories in Chicago. There was a guy who wrote an H.H. Holmes one. Vincent wrote one of them. And the woman to his right in that awesome hat is Nellie's Child, who was also known as Lillian Colley. She comes up on a lot of my tours. When she was a 20-year-old flapper, she ran a tea room called the Wind Blew Inn, which the cops used to raid all the time because of rumors that she was hosting petting parties there. She had to go before a judge and say, "Your Honor, I solemnly swear there is no snuggle pupping at the Wind Blew Inn." She was sentenced to read a book of fairy tales. After that, she worked in Cannery Row for a while, became a mystery novelist, and then a more serious novelist, wrote a play that was on Broadway for one day. And here she is. This is a photograph that surfaced just recently. Somebody found a picture of the autograph signing party for Chicago Murders. And you can still find autographed copies of this, signed by several of the authors. Must have been a very popular party. They still pop up on eBay now and then. So there is Lillian with Vincent Starrett. I bid on one of those copies once, but I didn't get it. All right, so those are some Rosehill graves that we never seem to get to on the regular ones. Let's move on to Rosehill Cemetery, a couple of miles north. You just go a couple of miles north up Clark Street, then take a quick left to these gorgeous ivy-covered gates designed by William Boyington, who is buried not far away from the gates, also did the Chicago Water Tower. This place opened about a year before Graceland Cemetery. About 1859, the burials began. And back towards the pond, we'll start off going back towards the pond here, is a guy who was well known in Chicago in his day, and then even well known after his death for the manner of his death. It's a guy by the name of Amos Snell. Amos Snell owned the land on which Milwaukee Avenue sat and operated it as a toll road. For years, he got away with this. Eventually, the courts ruled that no, he had no right to charge people to go on Milwaukee Avenue, but by then, his money was already made. But then, towards the end of his life, he started walking around telling people his life was in danger. For one thing, there was a guy that he had sent to jail on his testimony 20 years before who was about to get out. He was walking around acting incredibly paranoid. Then one night it happened. It was murder most foul. Amos Snell's lifeless body discovered by his servants yesterday morning. 2 bullet wounds inflicted, either one of which would have proved fatal. The deed perpetrated by unknown burglars who were surprised by the deceased. Burglars' bloody work. So at least it was thought to be burglars. The fact that the guy had been wandering around paranoid, waving a pistol around in the middle of the night suggests to me that it might have just been more of an accident. But we're not quite at a point. This was the 1890s. Forensics were 1888. The forensics were not quite where they should have been yet. But he had this mansion down in what is now the West Loop area. We went walking in the general neighborhood when we went to that park on one of the mini tours just recently. So one night in the middle of the night, somebody broke their way through the lock, rifled through the safe, apparently took stuff, which indicates that maybe it wasn't just him walking around being paranoid and shooting at stuff. But they never really figured out who did it. This was still an era long before forensics. Now, most notably, several years later, there was a paint dealer named Tascott, who was also a small-time crook. On his deathbed, he confessed to the murder of Amos Snell. This was a huge story for about a day, but most people just kind of brushed it off. It was one of those things where a few people claimed the credit for it when they had nothing left to lose over the years, probably just because they wanted to write themselves into the history books. And it worked. A good century after Mr. Tascott's death, here we are still talking about him. So maybe I shouldn't let him get away with all of this. Let's move up a little bit around the pond here. Up around the pond is a whole row of great mausoleums, including this one to a banker by the name of Charles G. Dawes. Now, Charles G. Dawes was a banker by trade, but also an amateur composer. One day a friend came home and found him working on a melody that he'd written down that he thought was pretty catchy. It went da-da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da. They published it under the name Melody in A Major. It became a really big hit. After his death in the early 1950s, somebody wrote some words to it, and it became a pop standard, as performed here by Bob Dylan in 1981. Many a tear has to fall, but it's all. Many a tear has to fall, but it's all. That's going to give me some copyright notices. Many a tear has to fall, but it's all in the game. Of course, by the time the song became a hit, Charles Dawes was better known as a Nobel Prize recipient and the Vice President of the United States under Calvin Coolidge. But I don't like to lead with Vice President on this, guys. Like, here's the guy who was Vice President under Coolidge. You'd have to be a very interesting person, a very strange person, honestly, to get really excited about that. But as vice president, a job he got partly because nobody else wanted it. They tried to get Governor Loudon of Illinois to be vice president. He had turned down the opportunity. Dawes spent most of his time antagonizing Congress and just trying to be difficult the whole time. But he was a really interesting guy. For his plan to help keep Europe from starving to death after World War I, the Dawes Plan actually won him the Nobel Peace Prize. Let's move on a little bit, though. Some of the people are a lot less documented. We know a lot about Dawes. We've been to his mansion on the morning mini tours. It's still on the shore in Evanston. It's a terrific-looking place. And, of course, people are still covering his song. But not too far from him is one of those ones that's a big enough one that you know the guy at least must have had a lot of money. But it's hard to figure out exactly where. This is Mattie May, probably Matilda May, who died in 1893. Now, it's always kind of annoyed me that there's a big statue of her, but then the big name on it is her husband's name. If you do the math here, it says that she would have been 16 when she was married. There's a couple of wedding announcements. That's about all that we really know about her, is the wedding announcements. She married Harry May when he was 25 and she was 16. Really, the numbers are off. She was, if you really look at the date, she was, I think, 15 at the time. But Harry was a baker. That's about all I can get on him, but obviously he was a very successful one because when his wife died at the age of 23, likely suspect there would have been tuberculosis. But I'm not entirely sure. 1883 was past the cholera years for the most part. But that's about all we can tell, is that he built this magnificent statue of her that unfortunately has been rather deteriorated by Chicago winters and acid rain over the years. Some of the others have glass cases over them that have protected them a little bit better. This is one that could definitely stand to be cleaned. Now, probably the Rosehill grave that I get asked about the most, that's a little too far away from the walking route to get to, is, for one thing, we've got the Loeb family plot. Now, this is the family of Richard Loeb of the famous thrill killers of Chicago, Leopold and Loeb of the 1920s. We've done whole tours based on them. These were a couple of young kids already out of college and going to grad school, even though they were only about 20 years old, highly educated, and for some reason, and every different treatment of the case gives a different reason for why they decided to do this, but for some reason they decided that they ought to murder somebody. Some versions say that they thought they were Nietzschean supermen and the laws didn't apply to them. Others say that they were just bored. Others say that really Loeb was the one behind it. Leopold was in love with him, so he just went along with it. All of these are maybe partially true, but really one of the reasons the case has endured is there's just no satisfying explanation for why they did what they did. But they murdered a 14-year-old kid named Bobby Franks, did a really bad job of covering up the evidence. But it was also kind of a coincidence. They told everybody that he had been kidnapped, or they sent a ransom note. The family was looking, but some hunters accidentally stumbled upon the body. It was hidden under a railroad culvert near Wolf Lake. It's really kind of an accident that it was ever found at all. But it was, and in fact, very quickly. They were both sentenced to life plus 99 years in prison. Loeb was murdered in prison. His ashes are rumored to be in this family plot. It's one of those things the cemetery obviously would not want to confirm or deny, but there's no other place that they're known to have been. But what's most striking about it to me is the Loeb family plot is just a very short hike away from the Franks family mausoleum where Bobby was buried. As we walk over from here, we'll start seeing it emerging just on the other side of these bushes. And Leopold, after he eventually got out of prison, he allowed himself to be infected with malaria to eventually get parole as part of a study. He visited Loeb's grave, the Loeb family grave, in his own family plot, which is around here as well. He would have walked right by, unless he took a really circuitous route, he would have walked right by the Franks mausoleum. We know that he was here, but we don't really know too many details of the trip. That's not the kind of thing that's known to survive. Another one that I think is on most people's walking tours, just because it's such a familiar name, but it's a little bit far out of the route for mine, is one that we actually did for Find a Grave Friday one time on the morning mini tours. Not too far away from the pond is the familiar name of Oscar Mayer. Oscar Mayer ran a butcher shop in what is now Old Town here in Chicago. And of course, since you're all going to get it stuck in your head yourself, it wasn't until well after his death in 1955, but not too far after his death, that his real claim to fame came out, which was, of course, the song.
Oh, I'd love to be an Oscar Mayer wiener. That is what I truly like to be. 'Cause if I were an Oscar Mayer wiener, everyone would be in love with me. A big parade is so inspiring.
Also, not far from her, one that I'd really like to work into the walking tours a little more. It's just a little geographically not quite doable, but it ties into so much of Chicago history. I've even done it on the virtual mini tours more than once. Is the grave here of a woman named Ida Hippach. Pictured here, who has so many connections to Chicago history and to world history, in fact. First of all, in front of the grave is her two sons, Robert and Archie. Died 1903. That should both say 1903. It kind of looks like a 2, but the way the grass is covering it. But Robert and Archie got tickets to a play called Mr. Bluebeard, December 30th, 1903, at the Iroquois Theater, which is a staple of Chicago history and Chicago disasters. This was the theater that caught fire, or some of the scenery caught fire and some of the drapes caught fire. Everything started to spread around. Everything that could possibly go wrong did. It was really the crush trying to get out that killed people more than anything else. The number of people died is estimated at about 600. That's about twice as many people as are thought to have died in the Great Chicago Fire a generation before, all in one building in about a 15 to 20 minute fire. But Ida, for her part, was still a socialite. Her husband owned a plate glass empire. So in her mornings, she went around traveling. She went around Europe for years, was in and out of Chicago for a long time. Then in January of 1912, she went over to Europe for a while. In April of that year, she decided to come back and booked a trip on the Titanic. So this is a Titanic survivor. She was initially told there was a rumble. She didn't really notice it at once. Some people told her, oh, we've hit an iceberg, but it's nothing to worry about. Someone even said, ladies, go back to bed. You're all going to catch cold. But she managed to get to one of the lifeboats, having no idea at the time that there weren't enough lifeboats for everybody, and made it into Chicago on the train the 20th Century Limited just a couple of weeks after the ship went down. Dreamed the Titanic was sinking and she tried to tell someone. There are a few different Titanic graves in Chicago. There's, at Graceland, there's 2 markers, people whose bodies were not recovered, one for Arthur Ryerson, and one for another guy who has no known connection to anybody in Chicago, but somebody put a marker for him, lost on the SS Titanic, in their family plot for reasons I have never been able to quite determine. But at the clear back of the cemetery, this would be about a mile walk from the entrance. But here's the big mausoleum. This is the big, you can only even see a part of it from here. Not presently open to the public. And even when it is, it can be kind of a labyrinth. The front door is usually locked. To get to the stuff right behind the front door, you have to go through the side, and then it's I get lost every time that I try. But right on the inside is this chamber for John Shedd, who was an executive in the Marshall Field Organization, but best known now for donating the aquarium to Chicago, the Shedd Aquarium. And that's reflected in some of the chairs that they have sitting out here. They have a lot of seashells and seahorses. There's a whole very subtle aquarium theme on the inside, but there, through the door, is the Shedd family crypt. I think I can lean down a little bit here. Yeah, you can see his sarcophagus is right in front, and behind is this magnificent stained glass window, usually said to be by the Tiffany Company, though I've gotten some... There are people who dispute that, I believe, the real Tiffany fans. We'll zoom in on that a little bit. I wish I could find more of an explanation for what they were going for here. The guy in the hooded robe with a key dangling around his chest and a sword and a torch. I always say it looks like the back of a Led Zeppelin album or something. And elsewhere in the mausoleum is one that'll be fun to children of the 80s like myself. The Zork Crypt. You are standing in a mausoleum. A staircase leads down and a hallway leads north. Don't get eaten by a grue. Now, just outside of the mausoleum is one of my favorite graves in Chicago. I love it when people's gravestones reflect their personality a little bit. And there's a single-person mausoleum out by the lake on the side of the mausoleum, looking out to Western Avenue. And this is the one-person tomb of James Minakakis, whose date of death is given here as 666. On top of it is this epitaph: from darkness he came, in darkness he lived, to darkness he returned, and from darkness he will be reborn to a better time. This may have been the most metal guy ever. Well, here's the thing, as I understand it, though, James is not that big of a heavy metal enthusiast, nor did he die on 666, nor so far has he died at all. He is still alive, and recently added the red paint onto this. It was plain white marble a couple of years ago, where it's red today. As I understand it, he's a vampire enthusiast. And he has declined through friends to be interviewed, but I think this is a magnificent one. I'm kind of surprised the cemetery let them do it. Sometimes the boards at corporate-owned cemeteries are a little bit picky about what you can and can't put on a gravestone. But hey, why not have a vampire thing on there if that's what you're into? I think that's terrific, personally. Another thing I can't always promise that we'll see at Rosehill is the deer. There's a whole herd of deer who live here. There's about a dozen to 15 who live here more or less full-time. Maybe more now. There was a baby running around yesterday. There's a few of them walking here. And they're pretty casual. They'll let you walk within about 10 feet of them most of the time. I think some people are... You shouldn't feed them, but I think some people do. Well, they seldom seem to leave the cemetery, if they ever leave at all. But here they were hanging around near the grave of Eliza Chapel Porter. Now, Eliza Chapel Porter is generally went into history as Chicago's first teacher. She ran a little schoolroom here back in the 1830s. What I think she's better remembered for is that she did at least a little bit of work on the Underground Railroad. According to a big biography ever written by her daughter. When they were living up in Wisconsin, a word came in that, hey, we've got some refugees who are escaping. Can you hide them out for a couple of days until the ship comes? So they said, okay, yeah, we can hide them out in our place. But then the ship was late. They had to continue hiding them in other places for a while until finally the ship did arrive. Now, it's really frustrating reading the biography of this. The daughter explains it over the course of a page or so and then says there were so many amusing incidents related to this that I laugh now just thinking of them. But then she doesn't say what those incidents were, she just goes back to talking about how pious her mother was. It's a real problem with any 19th century biography of somebody who was religious, is they kind of skimp on the anecdotes and skimp on the stories to talk more and more about how pious and Christ-like people were. A different taste of what we look for in biographies today. Well, we're talking about things like this. Of course, the ultimate Underground Railroad was the Union Army. And over here is a grave for the Pollard family. Over along the western edge of the cemetery, John Pollard served as a drummer boy in one of the United States Colored Troops regiments that was formed after the Emancipation Proclamation. He wasn't in the 29th, he wasn't in the Chicago group, but he served primarily as a drummer boy, as I understand it. Then eventually made his way to Chicago, where he and his wife became the first black settlers in Rogers Park. Which you can read different accounts of how the locals reacted to that. By most accounts, they fit right in, but others say that his wife, Amanda, always answered the door with a gun in her pocket, just in case. Now, among their children, there was one of them named Lester, who became an early black filmmaker in the 1910s. One of their sons, Fritz, who is not buried here, was one of the first black professional quarterbacks in professional football. And I don't have any examples of it, but following in his father's footsteps as a drummer, one of the guys who is buried here from 1928 was Hughes Pollard, who was an early jazz drummer. I found a couple of things that are said to be recordings of him, but they're bands that he played with, and I can't make out any drums on the recording. This is one of those things we're always still searching for new stuff to add to these. We've been to the Pollard's house. The Pollard's house is still standing in Rogers Park as well. And one more to close out. We've got a little overtime today. This is Charles Frederick Gunther. Was a candy man, sometimes credited with the invention of caramel. Caramel was his specialty. I very much doubt that he invented it, but it's the kind of thing he probably would have claimed to invent. Now, he was a businessman by trade here in Chicago, but his big thing was collecting memorabilia. He bought the old Libby prison, and the old Civil War prison, and had it transported to Chicago as an exhibit. He tried to buy the pyramids from Egypt to bring them to Chicago as a tourist attraction during the World's Fair. His collection included things like George Washington's clock. Or at least he said it was George Washington's clock, which is entirely plausible. But he also had things that you really have to wonder if he had any belief that these were real at all, such as the framed skin from the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Now, he donated most of this stuff to the Chicago History Museum. They don't keep most of it on display, but some of his objects they do, like Abraham Lincoln's deathbed is usually on display. That was one of his pieces. He hoped that the city would build an entire museum just for his stuff down in Grant Park someplace. Legal loopholes the city managed to get out of that one, but you gotta wonder, did he honestly think that this was the skin of the serpent of the Garden of Eden? And if so, don't you wish you had a car that you could sell to this guy? But alright, one others that I just wanted to throw in just because I was going through my files and liked the name here. You find so many great names. Harry Riddle. We remember me when the candlelights are glowing. But alright, everybody. So, our next virtual tour is going to be Thursday night. Well, we do virtual tours just about every morning. Tomorrow and Tuesday, they might come at different times than I would normally have them because I'm going to be on the road doing some filming. But Thursday night, our next full-length virtual tour will be the virtual edition of Prairie Avenue, Splendor and Scandals, the jewel of Gilded Age Chicago, with lots and lots of fascinating architecture and dark and twisted stories. And if you like dark and twisted stories, there are still some tickets available on Saturday Saturday, our next in-person tour will be The Dark History of Taylor Street. Now, there's certain stretches of road where, in research, I just find story after story after story. One of those is Taylor Street. They've got Prohibition-era gangsters. They've got 1850s public executions. They've got 1930s arson queens. They've got some ghost stories. It's all right there on Taylor Street. Few tickets remain for that. Not as many left, I don't think, for on Sunday afternoon, we will do the virtual edition, the in-person edition of the Prairie Avenue Tour. So I'm still going through all of these virtual ones that I've done over the pandemic. I'm trying to figure out which ones will translate into in-person or not. Prairie Avenue, I've got a smaller group than usual, fewer number of tickets than usual, just because I don't know how well it's going to work, but I know it's going to be a great tour. Then next Saturday after that, I figured since we're doing the Graceland Expanded today, I should probably already have something up for the next Graceland Cemetery tour. That'll be Saturday, July 31st at 11 a.m. In-person tickets are at mysteriouschicago.com. We do virtual mini tours just about every day, as I mentioned, and Fridays at 6:30 on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page, we do a show called Whiskey and a Cookie, in which we drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week, and usually I make prank phone calls to politicians that I feel deserve it. If should you want a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, t-shirt, hoodie, etc., just go to cafepress.com/mysteriouschicago. They've also got shot glasses, coffee mugs, flasks. You can be just as cool as these fine Georgia voters right here. And with that, everybody, I think that'll wrap us up. So I am going to put the Earl Father Hines back on, and we will just hang out like we always do. Thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody, especially anybody new. Hey, Gary. Nelda, if he does anything newsworthy, I'll give him a buzz. He doesn't hold an official office now, I don't think. So it's harder to get a voicemail for him. Thanks, Kathy.
Those who are driving out west here, well, let's stop and have a little Father Hines.
Thanks, Linda and Sue. Thanks, Eleanor. Oh, I thought he retired, Nelda. I'm thinking of Ron Paul. Rand Paul I can call anytime. He's always doing something silly. Diane, I've got a TikTok. I haven't used it for much yet. Amy, there's like, between Graceland and Rosehill alone, we got about 350,000 buried. I can always find more people. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Marita. Thanks, Aviva. Thanks, Chuck. Sunday mornings, that's been happening. It gets it broadcasts fine from here, but some people have trouble with it on Facebook who normally wouldn't. And there's no way to know why. It's something on Facebook's back end. Now, I don't know if we'll do a full-length tour next Sunday morning. The numbers have gone way down for Sunday morning lately. So I might need to just give myself a bit of a break for a while. So I know by in October, I'll be doing in-person stuff on Saturday mornings anyway. Hey, anybody just joining us, we're in the post-tour hang now. It was at 10 a.m. Central. But thanks for popping in. As soon as a few minutes after I'm done, it'll be up in the videos section of Mysterious Chicago's Facebook page. Thanks, Betsy and Libby. And Dana. Libby, you know what? Miles has not shown up yet. He was right over on the couch when I got started. Oh, and don't forget the upcoming Mystericon, too, October 1st through 3rd. Check out the Mysterious Chicago Regulars Facebook group for more information. I don't know if Earl Father Hines was from Chicago, but this is him playing in Chicago. Awesome, Jeff. All right, let me go find Miles. Miles. Oh, there you are. You weren't far. You just moved to another couch. Let's go. I want to see you, buddy. I've interrupted his nap. Miles taking lately a rare break from playing with the cat dancer toy that Layla got him. He wants to play with that all the time. Yeah, Captain George Streeter shot some people. And caused others to be shot. Thanks, Ava. Patches. Miles sends them back to Patches. Eric, no, I couldn't make it to Record Store Day.
Well, we're about halfway through this jive concert by Earl Father Hines and his orchestra, so now it can be told it's reaching you from the new...
What was the Dylan drop on Record Store Day?
Outside, where the couples are gaily dancing here in the cool atmosphere to this jive of Earl Father Hines. Yeah, but now comes Leroy Harris to sing Now It Can Be Told.
Oh wait, it was the I&I remixes. I didn't pick it up yet. I'm very excited for the 80 to 85 bootleg series coming up though. Yeah, the rewatch should be fine if you had glitches and freezes. I never got an alert saying that that it was going down, which I normally would if it was actually not broadcasting. Now, of course, that's not unheard of for it to stop broadcasting. Thanks, Ava. There's some cool stuff coming up on the Patreon this week, too. I've got, since I'm out of town for a bit, I've got everything all published ahead of time. I try to stay a couple of weeks ahead on the Patreon. Except for new announcements, which kind of come as they go. Carol, yes, that's part of the con. Rodney, I am live. Coming to you live and in person.
The effervescent swing of Father Hines, and you have Beside a Moonlit Stream.
Speaking of I, Earl Father Hines playing beside a moonlit stream. That is a line in I. Part of the reggae remix EP by Dr. Dread for yesterday's record store day. But we're now exactly 5 hours from the Dylan livestream special. And we have no idea what he's going to do. It's a different backing band than he normally has. He stopped mixing up the set list in 2013. So it's been like 10 years since there's been a show where I haven't had a general idea what he was going to play. I still think it's probably going to be about 2/3 war horses and chestnuts from the last 10 or 15 years. But you never know. Good meeting you, Amy. Thanks, Bob. I'm going to busy myself with running some errands and eating some lunch. So still got 5 more hours. Often on Days of Dylan shows, we'll just go hang out outside of the venue with all the other geeks. Especially if it's a general admission show and you got to get a good spot. But even when it's not, when he did, in 2005, he did 5 nights at the Chicago Auditorium. We'd all just kind of hang out in the vicinity. Like hanging, I remember I was walking to the venue one day and ended up walking next to the opening act's trumpet player for a long time. We just chatted for a bit. Merle Haggard came out and talked to us a little bit. Octavio, Mrs. Seltzer is still in bed. She has encouraged me to knock back on the Sunday morning tours a bit so she can get some sleep.
A tune titled, melodically, A Little Kiss at Twilight.
Hey, Ida in Arizona. For anybody just joining us, this is the post-show hangout right now. The tour was at 10 a.m. Central. So now we're just kind of hanging out after the tour. But the whole thing will be up on the Mysterious Chicago Facebook page's video section about 10 minutes after we finish. Karen, the Art Institute is the best. Don't miss the Van Gogh room. Some things you can miss, but most definitely not Van Gogh. I kind of like doing this one, the off-the-route one. We'll probably do this as more in-person tours come in. Definitely want to do more. We could definitely do more of these. There's a limitless supply of things that I can add here. I won't be in Minneapolis this week. I will be in Minnesota, but not in Minneapolis itself. I'll be out in the suburbs, right next to the mall from Mallrats, so 90s teenager paradise here. Christine, lunch for me is going to be leftover pizza. Party! Mysterious Chicago heavy metal album. I'm down. I got some heavy metal songs written. Have a good day, Linda. No, it's the Eden Prairie Mall. Just a little one that I don't imagine is in great shape these days. But it's where they filmed Mallrats. I think it was the only mall that would let them film such a movie there in the 90s. Thanks, Octavio. I'll see you next Sunday. Or Saturday. Thanks, Susan. Oh, Kirk, that's awesome. That's good to hear. I'll try to do some kind of broadcast at some point tomorrow. But it's just hard to predict what my schedule's going to be. I know that I'm going to be in an airplane at 10. Or at the airport, anyway. See you Sunday, Heather. Gene, I have no intention of canceling virtual tours, especially in the winter time. But as things pick up with a little more in-person, I might have to scale back a little bit. Kelly, for the walking tour on Taylor Street, I usually recommend parking somewhere in street parking on Taylor. So the walk goes from Halstead to Ashland. It's nice to have your parking space be kind of in the middle there. Yeah, right now the schedule of doing virtual ones daily plus the in-persons it's kind of getting to me.
But here's rhythm and jive, Earl Father Hines and the Saint Louis.
Kristen, I could. Yeah, it's going to be, I probably will, I think I'll be on the plane at 10 o'clock, though. I do remember the Minneapolis airport had really good pinball machines last time I was there. Like, they had that Phantom Menace pinball machine that was just awesome. It's not so much about not burning out, it's just a matter of I'm doing a little too much, and some of the things that I'm learning for the new tours are kind of getting out of my head as soon as I learn them. So I kind of need to spend some more time on research and putting stories back together. But also, that's what winter's for, isn't it? All right, everybody. I've got some errands to run before the Bob Dylan live stream, so I want to do a quick other plug for the upcoming tours. Next virtual one scheduled is going to be Thursday night, Virtual Prairie Avenue. It'll be a good way for me to relearn those stories, so I'll have them fresh for the Sunday afternoon edition of it, where we're going to try that one in person. Saturday evening, the next in-person day is going to be Dark History on Taylor Street. That one I've done a number of times over the years, but even then it was kind of a rare. It was like in the once or twice a year rotation. But we're going to bring that one back on Saturday, July 24th. A few tickets are still available. Couple more maybe. I don't know if they're already for Prairie Avenue yet. There might be. And then I just announced and just listed the Graceland Cemetery tour for a couple of weeks out. So, figured if I was going to do the expanded one today, I ought to have another one ready to go. In any case, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me today. I am going to go get lunch. Everybody have a great day. I will see you at some point tomorrow, I hope. I just haven't quite figured out how yet. So just keep watching your alerts. I will be on at some point. Same thing with Tuesday, and then we'll be right back to our regular schedule. Until then, everybody, I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tour saying stay safe, stay strong, and of course, if you can, stay spooky, everybody. Have a great day.